What's good, everybody? I'm the G with a PhD, and you're tuned in to the Green Gorilla Channel, a place where black men can express themselves freely, straight up, no chasing. So at the current moment, I'm going to give a little bit so black men can express themselves. Yeah, I do that all the time. I have that feedback going.
Okay.
I want to have that played up and just turn down the volume. So right now, it looks as if we only have 3 people there, but I get 12 thumbs up. This is confusing to me. This is my first time, using this technology, so I'm kind of, I'm still hard pressed to kind of figure it all out and work smoothly. But in due time, I'll begin to get it right.
Right.
So I'm going to give some more, allocate a little bit more time for people to come on in. I see there's a brother named Broman 03. He says he appreciates the stream. We got JoJo Sigma in the house. He said he knows this is going to be a good conversation. Salute to you, brother, also. We got 10 people in. I'm just going to give a few minutes or maybe, another minute for people to filter in. So, yeah, being from St. Louis is it's kind of a wild experience because the city is socially stratified. It's segregated. So you got there's a street in St. Louis called the Delmar Street. Or what is it? Avenue?
Okay.
Well, anyway, the whole point is on the south side of that street, the property value skyrockets anywhere from $70,000 to $80,000. Whereas if you're on the north side of the street, the property just devalues. Yeah. So you can literally be on the north side of that street, and your property is $80,000 to $90,000 worth. Less has less value than if it's on the south side of the street, because that is the demarcation line between whites and blacks in the city of St. Louis.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, it's like that in Fresno too, man. I mean, you can drive 10 minutes, 5 minutes down some streets, and you see everything from poverty to mansions. I mean, it's real, man. Their whole sections out of the neighborhood that don't even want to call themselves Fresno. They've been fighting to change their name as if they're a separate city, but they're on the same street, surrounded by Fresno. So, it's a trip, man.
Everywhere, man. They say the world is the ghetto, but it's the ghetto for us for sure.
Real talk.
So what I want to do is, if you please support the channel if you can. I'm going to leave a post on my Cash App. I'm not requiring that you give me any money, but any support that you can give will always help.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So I'm at G with a PhD. The Cash App. So what I want to do is introduce Brother Johnson here. We've been kind of talking and rambling for a few minutes just so we can get people in to the stream. But I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Tiasan Johnson for you all in case you haven't had any knowledge of who he is before. So Dr. Johnson, Tiasan Johnson, is an associate professor of Africana Studies at California State University, Fresno. He founded numerous Fresno State programs, including the Africana Studies online teleconference on Black Male Studies, the Onyx Black Male Film Festival, the Black Popular Culture Lecture Series and online research archive, the Onyx Black Male Collective, the annual Ashe Sankofa Black Film Festival, the annual Africana Studies Black Gender Conference, the African American Edge Initiative, the Africana Studies Black Elder Project, and the Hip Hop Research and Interview Project. Dr. Tiasan Johnson is the developer of the concept of Black masculinism and frequently publishes on anti-Black misandry, anti-Black male heterophobia, intraracial misandry, and white supremacy. His first book, You Must Learn, A Primer for the Study of Hip Hop, published in 2012, examines the social political histories that contribute to the development of hip hop culture and creates new theoretical frameworks for understanding its development. So that is list of accomplishments that Dr. Johnson has garnered for himself. So welcome to the show, my brother. Welcome. And thank you so very much for joining me. I know you're a good friend of mine, and we chop it up from time to time, but thank you for gracing me with your presence on this show. I really appreciate it.
Oh man, I'm happy to be here, and you can add fan to that, man. I've been following the Green Gorilla for a minute, man. So
You know, the reason I call myself a G with a PhD is because we keep it like straight up no chaser on this side of the fence.
right.
You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, I want to kind of like, I love academic talk, but I want this to be more like barbershop talk,
Okay.
So it's like, like where we always got to have a filter on to some degree. I mean, you can't just let loose all the way in this culture. You don't know who's looking, who's eavesdropping. But I mean, for the most part, we like to try to keep it, real here. And, I can use graduated terminology and, illustrate the wide array of words that I could use in order to articulate myself.
Right.
But I mean, that's all bullshit, man. At the end of the day, what I don't want to do is get caught up in the vernacular, but to try to get to the root of the issues so that laypersons can understand it.
Right.
So the title of the show, or the topic that we're going to be discussing today, is a term that has been coined by Dr. Johnson. And the name of that term is Necro envy. So, I mean, everybody is well aware of the mass killings of Black men at the hands of police in the United States. And everybody's well aware. I mean, people on my channel know we've kind of been through this ad nauseum, but it's a problem. And I mean, if you want to use data, I don't have like any charts or diagrams to show you, but every year, on average, 250 men or Black men are killed due to police violence.
Right.
Whereas, as it pertains to Black women, and we're not discounting Black women being killed by police, right? Because any death in the Black community is a tragedy. But the numbers for Black women are somewhere around 6 to 10, if my numbers, my memory serves me correct. So we're talking about Black men dying at a rate 20 times that of their Black female counterparts.
Right.
So the reason that we need to have this conversation is because oftentimes, I mean, there's a lot of attention being garnered over this issue, but there are some people who have a problem with that. They take pause with that. In particular, I want to bring to your awareness, and I want to show you, I want to show the listeners or the viewers here, if I can figure out how to do this, I want to show them, well, maybe I won't show it because, oh yeah, I can share the screen. Here we go. What I want to show them is, let me see, that's what I want to share, but I want to go here. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, that's not exactly what I want to be, what I want people to see. This is what I want people to see. Can you see that?
Yeah. Wait, I did for a second.
Okay. So I'm not having issues. I'm just dumb. Okay. So let me.
We both have them because somebody said in the chat my mic was too low. So I'm trying to see if there's a way I can turn it up, and I don't see one, particularly in StreamYard. So I do apologize if it is.
Can y'all hear him? Please let me know if you're capable of hearing my brother, Dr. Tiasan Johnson, or is he not audible at all?
Let me know. I think it was Brandon who was saying it, so not sure if it's still the same. I made some slight adjustments, but I don't know if they did anything.
Man, you're loud and clear on this end, so.
Okay, they said he's good. Okay, all right.
Okay, yeah, so you are loud and clear here. But what I wanted to do, I want to go to this Chrome tab, and I just don't know exactly how to get to it, but can you see this tab here?
I can see it.
Why are Black women and girls still an afterthought in our outrage over police violence.
Right.
And the article is written by Brittany Cooper, who is a professor at Rutgers University. And I mean, she's a Black feminist. And what Black feminists do is they center women. And not only do they center women, they center trans women, and they center members of the LGBTQ community. Now, in my viewpoint, I don't see anything wrong with them centering themselves. Okay? You can center yourself all day long. But the only issue I have, and I'm going to go back to StreamYard here and get myself back on deck here. The only problem I have is you're garnering attention on the deaths of Black males.
Yeah.
And it's like a bait and a switch. And I just want to know what you have to say about this. And I want to have a conversation about this because to me, one of the things that Black women who are feminists have a problem with is being erased. This is what they call it. Right? But in my viewpoint, the exact opposite is happening. Well, basically, I won't say that the exact is happening to Black men, but Black men are actually being erased.
Yes.
So in the very same vein, for them to have some sort of claim against erasure, they're doing the exact same thing.
Absolutely.
So talk to us about this, brother. Man. Like, make us make sense of this. Like, make it make sense, bro.
Man, I think at the end of the day, one of the things that's happened is we got to this place, particularly in mainstream culture, and feminists had a lot to do with this, where the idea was that we've heard enough from Black men. We know, we pretty much know all there will be to know. All that's important, we already know. So let's shift the conversation to other demographics that need more attention. And that's the idea. Except the problem is the issues that other groups face and the numbers they face those issues in aren't dramatic enough to draw in enough attention. So this is why I came up with Necro envy, because Black men do die, are incarcerated, or underemployed, and all these other dynamics to a degree that garners attention when brought up in the right circumstances. And so the same groups that want to ignore Black men have to use those numbers to get attention, but they want to quickly shift the conversation. So, and that kind of marks a kind of hostility, especially toward heterosexual Black men, that we're not allowed to talk about. And there is a hostility. And I'll talk a little bit about why, but I wanted to kind of build up on some of the things you said. I wanted to share, because I think I can share my screen a little bit.
Please.
Can you, let me see. Can you see that?
I can't see it.
I think you might have to, let me see. I don't know if you might have to add it. Okay, it's not letting me. Oh, there it goes. Okay, yeah. So I made this chart in response to a lot of the critiques I was hearing really after Ahmaud Arbery died, right? It was Ahmaud Arbery, and then there was the Central Park situation with, I think it was Christopher Cooper, I believe it was. And then, of course, we had George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and there was this large argument starting to start. And I think Brittany Cooper brought it up on Twitter, where she started this mess about, well, we're not paying enough attention to Breonna Taylor. And Dr. Stacey Patton, whose work I appreciate, called her out on it. And she said, they've been rioting for 3 days over Breonna Taylor. What are you talking about? Yet and still, Cooper didn't really listen to Dr. Patton, because this really wasn't about Breonna Taylor. It was about Black feminist advancement. So in doing that, she's trying to garner this attention. Time magazine reaches out to her. And this goes directly to your point about who's being silenced, who's being made invisible. Nobody's reaching out to Black masculinists from Time magazine or time.com. Nobody's reaching out to them. So they reached out to her. They put her article up where she's saying there's been not enough attention. But what's interesting is very few people actually do know the numbers. So I did this chart just to make it simple, straightforward, and I use data that's readily accessible to everybody, right? So according to the data, you can see exactly what you pointed out, right? The average number of deaths for Black men and Black women per year, just in the last 5 years, right? I mean, there's research to show we can go past 2015 if we need to, but the dynamics hold consistently. Now, there's a couple other elements that I kind of added in here, and then I did a short video on my channel about it, just to provide some clarity, right? So, in terms of LGBT, the estimates show there's about 22 on average LGBT. I'm sorry, trans. Let me be very specific. We'll get to LGB in a minute. So with trans, there's about 22 that die per year across race.
Okay.
Now, most of them are, biologically born males, black males at that, who are who consider themselves females. Those are the majority that tend to die. But when you talk about dying at the hands of police, it's only about 3% of those 22 per year. So basically saying one person off and on, depending on the year, dies by police violence. Now, here's the trick. A lot of the time, it's actually biologically born female trans, meaning they've become men. Many of them taking testosterone, right? And so visibly, they appear as black men. Those are the ones that occasionally die at the hands of the police. But again, you're talking about one per year. Statistically speaking, one per year. When it comes to LGB, right? The total population, according to UCLA, in the country is about 4%. About 4%. So on average, statistically speaking, you're not going to have more than 4% of the black folk being killed by cops that are more than likely LGB. Not more than 4%. So overwhelmingly, the numbers of those most killed are heterosexual black males at the hands of police. This marks a fear of black men, a particular type of anti-black misandric heterophobia that goes back to slavery. It's very particularly drawn toward heterosexual black men. Many of the lynchings that took place up through the mid-20th century were in response to the fear of black men raping white women. That's not something that you attribute to LG and B. That's not something you really attribute to trans. That's not something you attribute to black women. That is a fear that is distinctly targeted at heterosexual black males. And you're not supposed to say any of this because everybody wants you to focus on every other group, because everybody's really competing for philanthropic dollars, federal resources, political advancement, so you can advance policy in the interest of your demographic. And they all have 501c3s and various types of protest organizations. So they're really competing for white dollars. And they're using black male deaths to do it while attempting to eliminate black males from the discussion. That's really what this comes down to. It's competition for white dollars. And that's where the Necro envy comes from. The envy at how many are dying and the extent to which we can show those numbers for black men. You don't see them for anyone else. This is why when you see people talk about like the killings of black women by police or whatever, they don't ever use direct numbers. What they use is, the numbers are higher than any other group of women. They'll try and play with it like that because they know if you see six women in a year killed, it's not that that's unimportant. It's just that it doesn't garner much attention. Now, here's where it really gets deep. If you really push the narrative, you really have to look at how those women died. Even if we talk about Breonna Taylor, what was the circumstances around her death? The police weren't looking for her. Who were they looking for?
Yeah, I pointed that out in one of my casts before.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And nobody wants to talk about that, right? Nobody wants to talk about the fact that you'll have women who are dying from stray bullets. They're dying from being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or really because a cop was shooting at a black male. Those kind of incidents would dramatically change the narrative, and they don't want to do that. So the Brittany Coopers will keep the discussion strictly on the deaths and then make the argument that we're ignoring black women's death, with the subtext being it's black men doing it. Now, that's the other part of this we got to discuss. Black men kind of end up as the ones getting blamed for taking up too much room in the conversation. But look at us, man. You and I are on YouTube, right? How many subscribers do we have? You know what I mean? Yeah. How does that compare to CNN, to NBC, and yet somehow black men, become the blame for either dying too much, or we're blamed for being homophobic or sexist because we somehow don't represent, don't protest, don't speak enough about women and LGBTs that are killed, even though every protest, uprising, and riot I've seen, black men have been present.
Man, dude, we're there.
We're there.
We are there. But you know what the problem is, Dr. Johnson? They're not there. They're not there. I mean, they're there for all of the reasons that you mentioned above, in reference to the Necro dollars, the death dollars, you know, the money dance.
Yeah,
they're not there with us in spirit. And this is why I say this. And I put this on a Facebook post earlier today. Some of you know who I really am. I'm just using this moniker, the G with a PhD and the green gorilla, for purposes for which I will not articulate at the current moment, but it doesn't matter.
Right.
All I'm trying to say is, if you look at what's happening, it's happening because Black feminists have a concept called decentering. And decenter is just, again, a fancy word for saying marginalized. Basically, Black men, as a matter of principle of feminist politics, need to be marginalized. They need to be decentered. They need to be pushed to the periphery, precisely because historically there's this narrative that they've been patriarchal, and they've been able to garner all of the attention for themselves and only articulate their own needs and interests. Now we've reached the point at which Black men need to take a back seat in reference to leadership and allow women to lead, and allow trans women to lead, and allow members of the LGBTQ community to lead. Now, look, I don't have a problem with LGBTQ women leading. Don't come and lead over the corpse of a Black man. That's the only problem I have. Don't clout chase and swagger jack. I don't even see how they could be considered swagger jack. This is death jacket. You know, absolutely. This is just like, to me, it's insidious. It's like you're helping the oppressor, because at the end of the day, if Black men are healthy, if they're thriving, if they're flourishing, we can impart our flourishing to those who are in immediate contact with us. To the extent to which we are languishing, we're doing bad, that's going to have an environmental impact on those we come into contact with. If we don't have any money because we have to continuously be saddled by a criminal justice system that is taxing us on top of taxing us, how can we take care of our children? Other than by means of the underground economy, which a lot of Black men opt for, which places us back into danger, and then you have to use force and fraud within the context of it, because if you don't, then you'll get run over. So the idea is, if Black men are thriving, we can impart that thriving to others. We can have others share in it. To the extent to which you don't, it just seems like extreme narcissism and selfishness to me, to only want to look after your own group, when another group of people are more heavily impacted by a phenomenon, and you tell them they can't even talk about it or discuss it on their own terms. Exactly.
And that's absolutely ridiculous. That would be like Black men, you know, taking over the discussion on breast cancer in the Black community and deciding to talk about how much we suffer from it, even though we 2 to 4% of the cases, right? But we're gonna take over the discussion about it, and really we're trying to do it because there might be federal funds we can get in regard to cancer that we're gonna fixate on ourselves. But if over 98% of the cases are Black women, how we look, you know, trying to jack that conversation. And that's kind of that's one of the things that I see happening with this, and it's frustrating because a lot of this is actually based on this Black feminist argument that really came about not too long after the Combahee River Collective, around this argument that the nationalist Black Power era, the civil rights era, were all marked by heterosexual Black men oppressing and excluding every other demographic from the discourse. And this is why your channel was so important, man, because you talked about the Combahee River Collective, and you also posted those videos from Brenda Werner. And Verna was one of many women that were like, yo, that didn't happen. She's like, black men didn't. She said, look, the majority of the civil rights movement were women. A lot of people don't even know the majority of the Black Panther Party were women, right?
Right, yeah.
They promoted black men and pushed black men into the camera, into the eye. You know what I mean? They actually promoted that dynamic because they wanted to show that the community was intact, that there were strong, intelligent men in positions of authority, but it wasn't black men oppressing them. Look, I mean, and I hear this argument even today, right? When people say, well, black men are patriarchs and they exploit the community. And I'll say, well, what's an example? Well, look at the church, right? The church has a black male pastor and he tells everybody what to do. Therefore, he's patriarchal. And I'd be like, okay, look at the congregation. Congregation is over 70% women.
Right.
How many times have you seen a pastor cater his words to a primarily female congregation, right? Chastising the males for various things, but just catering that population. He doesn't do anything without their authority. Well, let's say he decides that, the black female congregation decides they no longer want him as a pastor or a male pastor at that. What exactly could he do to stop them from leaving?
Right.
What exactly could he? I mean, or voting him out and bringing in somebody. You see, at the end of the day, what I'm saying is that black men have never been in a position to exclude, silence, or oppress anybody. These just became popular terms to use because it fit what white feminists were saying about white men, right? And it was such an easy transition to take that language and apply it to the black community. But people make this assumption that all men share this position of power. And it's a lazy assumption, but it's one that really came out of the feminist movement. And a lot of people never really reflected on whether or not that actually applied to the black community. And it doesn't. It actually doesn't. And that's one of the reasons for black male studies, because one of the things we can say very straightforward is, we've never had that position. We don't aspire to that position. That black men are the most progressive group of men you're going to find. And we haven't had the capacity to oppress anybody else or the will. So it's disingenuous for that argument to be made with no evidence and no proof. But the fact that people just want to say it, and because it works in the white community, that somehow lends credibility to the argument, to the feminist argument in the black community, that that's the same situation happening with us. And it isn't. Right. And this is just something that, and I think Antonio Moore touched on it last week as well. When he was on Yvette's show, where he actually talked about the difference between white and black men is when the white feminist movement attacked white men, they could show empirically that white men were in a position of not only authority, but privilege. Right. And that it was a privilege that they didn't share to the same degree. Right. But you can't show that in the black community. On every important metric, black men are actually below black women in many instances. I mean, I don't care if you talk about income. A lot of the charts will actually show you that black men make more, but what they don't take into account is the number of black men that have been incarcerated. So when you factor in incarceration, we make less. We talk about employment. Black men are employed to a far lesser degree than black women. We talk about independent business owners. Black women are the demographic that open new businesses more than any other group in the last number of years. Almost whatever metric you talk about, health, life expectancy, death, cancer rates. I mean, we can go on and on. Black males are in no position of superiority over black women. College graduation, K through 12. I mean, let's talk about it. None of them. But right. Somehow we oppress the community.
That's sad, man. Well, I know people like yourself and people like myself, we're speaking about it. We're having discussions about this.
Mm-hmm.
But normally when we mention these issues, then what happens is the communication that should be taking place becomes cut off.
Mm-hmm.
Semantic noise is introduced.
Mm-hmm.
A blockage is set up, or a blockade is set up.
Mm-hmm.
And then ad hominem arguments get to spill over.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like, okay, well, if you don't acknowledge that black women are magic, and they are. We're not saying that they're not. Okay, so black women are magic. But at the same time, that doesn't take away from what the hell is going on with black men and our right to have a discussion about it without being called misogynists, without being called homophobes or transphobes. Once we start talking about our issues, we get told we can't talk about these issues. And the most perplexing thing about it all is that there is a small number of Black men in the academy who are talking about such issues, but overwhelmingly, Black men in the academy are not talking about it. So I don't know if you want to even take a stab at trying to understand what that might be all about. And, you know, look, I don't want to be like, when you film shows like this, there's going to be repetition. So you heard this before, you need to hear it again. Repetitiveness is the key to success and understanding. Okay. So I'm just saying this for my audience. We need to hear what we have to say again and again and again, because if you listen to everyone else in the Black community who has their own interest group politics agenda going on, all you're going to hear is variations of the same trope. Okay. So, but coming back to this issue about the voicelessness, I would call it a kind of self-deprecation or a kind of self-silencing. Why are Black men not saying anything about it? Why when we're being shamed about having a discussion about things that impact us most heavily, why are Black men not saying anything?
Well, here's the thing, man. So we know that most universities have a women's studies, gender studies department on their campus, right?
Right.
How many of them have male studies? We're not even talking Black male studies, just even male studies. It's a gender, right? But the way it's treated in the academy, you would think it wasn't. I think there's like one program in the United States, and of course one in Scotland with our boy Dr. Tommy Curry, right? So when you talk about why men aren't speaking up, there's very little institutional or structural support for them to do so without blowback. So you got people worried about their jobs, right? Because feminism has become this kind of religion, and we're not talking about the actual push to make sure that women have equal access to employment or whatever else. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the ideology of feminism has become damn near a religion and has initiated these kind of intellectual witch hunts where people can lose their jobs simply for saying something that the rest the mainstream society doesn't like or feminists don't like. And so, with Black men, I mean, there's only about, oh goodness, I think I was pulling this up the other day, and I know I shared it with you in a private little chat, but I mean, all in all, you only have about 4,000 tenured Black men across the entire country, right? The total population of Black faculty on a college level is about 46,000. And Black women kind of lead us by about 7,000. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you factor in that there are more Black women in the student, staff, and faculty level, there are more Black women on most college campuses than there are Black men. That Black men have never gotten more college degrees in any year than Black women. And that, in fact, since 1976, we have half the number of degrees Black women do. What we're saying is when you get to a college campus, the majority across the board are women, across race. But when you deal with the Black, aspect of the academy, what you tend to find is that you have more women. They're in more positions of authority, and they're in more positions to complain in a way that might be devastating to Black men's employment. So you got a lot of Black men that won't touch gender with a 10-foot pole, especially since there hasn't been an adequately developed vocabulary for Black men's experiences. So to do so, many of them would have to use feminist concepts that don't really apply, and a lot of them don't want to touch it. So we end up being silent to it, and it becomes even more of a problem, right? And that's something we got to challenge outright, because at the end of the day, people need to know what's going on, and people can't know if it's not being said, if it's not being articulated.
I agree with you there. I on a number of occasions have heard Black men in the academy lament over some of the treatment that they've been subjected to by Black women. I mean, it's almost as if the very same thing that Black women are accusing Black men of doing, they're actually playing out in the real world, are accusing us. I mean, And
Yeah.
so you this is what I do know about politics. What especially a new kind of politics. First, it takes a few mavericks to do something or to say something. And then that opens up a kind of new understanding. So then consciousness raising becomes paramount, which, if it's taken to the next level, a kind of change will ensue, but only to the extent to which people have the audacity, the boldness, the kind of heroic spirit that will usher in a paradigm shift or a kind of change in the paradigm. And I'm wondering if it's going to come from up top or if it's going to come from down below, from the grassroots. Because I don't think, just to be honest, I mean, too many people's jobs are online, people's academic reputations are at stake. I mean, you are Maverick. You just, it's like Eminem, you just don't give a what.
Well,
you care, but at the same time, it's like some people don't want to rock the boat. The last thing
absolutely
is to be in confrontation with a group of people who are accusing them of being misogynistic and homophobic and transphobic. Because in this, we live in a cancel culture, a politically correct culture. Where people can label you or brand you in a specific kind of way, which then kind of like halts or stultifies your advancement. And I just think it's intellectually lazy and dishonest, in my viewpoint. And I think it's unbecoming of what scholarship or what the overarching aim of scholarship is to begin with. In theories, you open them up in the public sphere to scrutiny, after which that was a good idea, that wasn't a good idea, this is right, this is not right, and so forth. But I think that what ends up happening is people are so invested in their ideals and their ideology and their own work that they can never even admit that maybe that there's something missing within the context of their theorization. But people just have to begin to push back.
We do, but here's the thing. In the university setting, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, one of the positions of elite status has always been tenure, right? Tenure has been, the notion of being at a degree in your career where you just can't arbitrarily be fired. And actually you have to do something pretty egregious to even get that. And even if you do, you still may have grounds for an incredible lawsuit. So tenure is this vaunted elite status in the academy that many of us have been blocked from, right? So when I say there's only 4,091 brothers across the entire country with tenure, that tells you how difficult that is. And you've had to play the game to get to that point if you get to it, right? So you already might have a certain kind of way of getting down that would prevent you from speaking up about certain things that I think need to be spoken up about. Now, what kind of also shifts that with people like you and I come from a blue collar background. I don't come from an elite background. I come from people that worked every day. You know what I mean? And so my whole push into going into the academy was because I wanted to speak to the truths that they needed to be spoken to. So I already had that kind of ethic, but when I didn't have tenure, it was difficult to do without being worried about my career. So when I finally did get tenure, I realized that comes with a responsibility of speaking out. So you're going to have a low percentage of brothers in particular that are willing to do that, because in many instances we tend to work in spaces where we're in the minority, not only racially, but even in terms of gender. So you spend so much time worried about, what you can say, it becomes a problem. Now I want to also deal with this issue you brought up a second ago about magic, like black girl magic. Look, I grew up in a family of majority women. I get it. It's not the real magic of women that I have a problem with. But what I have a problem with is this kind of constructed idea that black women are these kind of special, fantastical fairies or whatever, because that's predicated on some very problematic ideas. And what do I mean? Well, I posted a video from Shahrazad Ali late last night. It's only a couple minutes long. And brother, she said something that I had never heard anyone say. She said black women have been extended $20 trillion that black men haven't. Whether you're talking about college access, welfare, so for poor women, you got welfare access that men didn't get because we had the man in the house rule that meant that in order for our families to get it, we couldn't be present, right? And that was the practice for a long time. It's no longer technically there, but at the end of the day, men just don't get as much access to that as women do. They have WIC, they have housing, vouchers. Matter of fact, you got black men with housing vouchers that still can't get anybody to accept the vouchers, even if they get them. So, but what Shahrazad was talking about is you had a certain amount of resources, up to 20 trillion, designated for black women over the last 50 to 60 years. When you talk about magic, when you talk about accomplishment in the face of racism, that's a little different when you've had a certain type of backing that men haven't had. So my problem with magic in regard to black women is it presupposes in many ways that there's something wrong with black men and that we can't be on equal par or even have equal access to magic as our women. And so what you end up with is this kind of generic idea that black men are faulty. But then when you find out about this 20 trillion that Shahrazad is talking about, it's like, wait a minute. Okay, there's a different conversation that needs to be had. Are we talking about magic or are we talking about purposeful structural underdevelopment?
Right.
Purposeful structural underdevelopment of black men. Now that's a very different conversation. So now I'm not really interested in talking about how you magically achieved something that many black men couldn't. I'm more interested in finding out why black men couldn't. What were the barriers that kept them from doing it? And why is it that many of our women no longer talk about those barriers? Even when they're college educated, does it have anything to do with the fact that we stopped talking about those barriers and started talking about magic?
Well, peep this. So I'm pretty sure that as a black masculinist scholar, I always screw that word up, man.
Right.
It doesn't roll off the tip of the tongue.
Right.
However, I'm pretty sure you've heard of David Walker in this appeal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I want to share with you an excerpt from David Walker's appeal that might give some insight into the naivety and the kind of like, I don't want to say, because in some instances I think it's targeted, it's directed, and it's done conscientiously. But in other instances, I think it's done because some women are just oblivious to the political reality of black people and specifically black men versus black women. I don't think they understand it. I think that they assume that we experience the world and the opportunities that exist in it in the same way.
Exactly.
But that's just not the case. A life of black men is different from that of black women. And the kind of opportunities infrastructurally that exist for women as a whole do not exist for men as a whole. And one of the things we don't have is access to networks. So anyway, David Walker wrote this appeal. And David Walker was an abolitionist, a black abolitionist who was born to mulatto parents. Well, not mulatto parents, but I think he had a white father and a black mother. Okay. He lived from 1785 to 1830. He mysteriously vanished.
Mysteriously.
As people who say some radical things do quite often. But, in his appeal, he says something because what he does is he cites a newspaper article about a group of black rebels who actually were able to break free. And then, well, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, but just peep it out. So this is what he says. And I want to kind of bring up the screen, but even if I bring it up, I'm not quite sure that people will be able to see it. But I think it's worth trying anyway.
Okay.
Let me see here. I'm trying to share. Did you see this? Afrayan murder? So he says, and this is just from a newspaper article, and it says, and it was written for white folks, okay? But he's just manipulating it into his document. A most shocking outrage was committed in Kentucky about 8 miles from this place on 4th, whatever the name of the street is. A Negro driver. So he's talking about a Negro slave driver.
Okay.
The agent of white supremacy is a Negro. Don't lose sight of that fact. So this black man was going out doing the work of slave owners. So a Negro driver by the name of Gordon, who had purchased in Maryland about 60 Negroes, was taking them, assisted by an associate named Allen and the wagoner who conveyed the baggage to the Mississippi. Now notice this, and the men were handcuffed and chained together in the usual manner for driving those poor wretches, while the women and children were suffered to proceed without encumbrance.
Wow.
It appears that by means of a file, the Negroes, unobserved, had succeeded in separating the iron which bound their hands in a way as to be able to throw them off at any moment. About 8 o'clock in the morning, while proceeding on the state road leading up to leading from Green up to Vanceburg, 2 of them dropped their shackles and dropped their shackles and commenced to fight. When the wagoner rushed in with his whip to compel them to desist. At this moment, every Negro was found to be perfectly at liberty, and one of them, seizing a club, gave Pettit a violent blow on the head, which laid him dead at his feet. And Allen, who came to his assistance, met a similar fate from the contents of a pistol fired by another of the gang. Gordon was then attacked, seized, and held by one of the Negroes, whilst another fired twice at him with a pistol, the ball of which each time grazed his head, but not proving effectual. He was beaten with clubs and left for dead. They then commenced pillaging the wagon. So basically, you got a group of Negroes who broke loose. They killed 2 of the white guys, and they tried to kill the Negro, but they weren't actually able to do it. Okay. So then it says, so they could pillage the wagon. So 16 of the Negroes then took to the woods. Gordon, in the meantime, not being materially injured, was enabled by the assistance of one of the women to mount his horse and flee. Pursued, however, by one of the gang on another horse with the drawn pistol. Fortunately, he escaped with his life, barely arriving at a plantation as the Negro came in sight, who then turned about and retreated. The neighborhood was immediately rallied and a hot pursuit was given, which we understand has resulted in the capture of the whole gang and the recovery of the greatest part of the money. 7 of the Negro women, or 7 of the Negro men and 1 woman, it is said, were engaged in the murders and are going to be brought to justice on the next court proceeding in Greensboro. Now, that's what David Walker has to say about this. He says, and I know I'm kind of being lengthy here, but there's a point to it. He says, here, my brethren, I want you to notice, particularly in the article above, the ignorant and deceitful actions of this colored woman. I beg you to view it candidly as for eternity. Here, a notorious wretch with 2 other Confederates had 60 of them in a gang, driving them like brutes, the men all in chains and handcuffs, and by the help of God, they got their chains and handcuffs thrown off, and caught 2 of the wretches and put them to death, and beat the other until they thought he was dead, and left him for dead. However, he deceived them, and rising from the ground, this servile woman helped him up on his horse, and he made his escape. Brethren, what do you think of this? Was it in the natural fine feelings of this woman to save such a wretch alive? I know that blacks, take them half enlightened and ignorant, are more humane and merciful than the most enlightened and refined European that can be found in all the earth. Let no one say that I assert this because I'm prejudiced on the side of my color against the whites or Europeans. For what I write, I do it candidly for my God and for the good of both parties. Natural observations have taught me these things. There is a solemn awe in the hearts of blacks as it respects murdering men. But anyway, what he ends up going on to say is, what in the hell is wrong with a woman who aid and abet the side of the oppressor in destroying a group of Negroes who found their freedom and liberty through an act of rebellion. So then the question becomes, what are our women doing? Are they not like this wretch? I hate to say this because I don't want to believe this. Being sold out.
Well, I think we're talking about the same camp of people, and it's not Black women as a category. It's a demographic that is how would I put it? Interested in being paid off, interested in receiving the baubles from those who oppress them for their own personal advancement. And you got a collective of men that are involved in that as well, right? The problem is, I would argue for the longest period of time, you probably had a larger collection of Black men and women that were more interested in seeing an improved quality of life for Black folk in general. But this is why the 1960s to now, really, but especially the 60s to the 80s or 90s is so critical, because this is the era where you had this manufacturing of the idea that women could get the bag. Women could now be a part of be full citizens. Essentially, I don't necessarily mean visibly, but they could be white. In other words, they could live this kind of natural American life that whites live without having to deal with the nastiness of racism. And part of how that was advanced was the rise of white feminism, which only came about to really check the civil rights movement. Because here's the thing, man. At the end of the day, the core of the civil rights movement was the Black family. That was the core of it. You couldn't really dismiss the movement as long as it was the core of the movement. The family was the core. And then so the way it went, the family was the core, and the family functioned in the church, both of which were independent Black spaces. So that was the basis of the movement. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that it was illegal for us to congregate, especially right after slavery, anywhere outside of a church. So the church became the focal point, but the family was the focal point of the church. Well, when feminism comes along, they're tapping women on the shoulder and they're saying, look, we have an opportunity for you to advance very quickly, but you just got to leave those men behind, because really they're oppressing you just like our men are oppressing us. And so it didn't take but really a decade before you started to see women beginning to enjoy certain types of advancements in employment, certain types of advancements in terms of policy. And one of the biggest ones that nobody talks about is double minority status, right? Affirmative action. The way it was initially designed, it was really designed with Black men in mind, because Black men are the target. I mean, at the end of the day, this has always historically come down to white men attacking Black men. And this is something you're not supposed to say, because you're supposed to say that it's equal across the board. But the data shows us that Black men are the damn target. But that aside, this idea became, you could advance and you could get ahead, and double minority status meant that because you were Black and a woman, corporations, even federal, institutions who were trying to meet these affirmative action standards got 2 for 1 if you hired a Black woman. So with that said, they were able to advance. So now, and this is something I think you and I are familiar with, you move ahead 20 years and you routinely seeing Black women taking trips to Italy, taking trips on Magic, Girls Trip. You saw the movie Girls Trip. All of that is representative of a new class of Black women who are able to enjoy the American dream on terms that not even their mothers or grandmothers could ever fathom. But it was at the expense of Black men that happened. But instead of there being a discussion about why Black men haven't been able to achieve that, you know what the discussion was? How come she can't find somebody to date? Right? How come she can't find somebody to marry? That became the discussion, not what were the things that advanced her and kept him back. That's not the conversation. So you have a generation of Black women that fundamentally believe that they're better than their men. Now, I talk about all of this stuff, and I do it in the manosphere because it's really the only place where Black men have been able to talk about it. But I talk about it because this quote unquote gender war that people are describing it as, it's not just about a gender war. It's not about some men who got their hearts broke once and now they're out to get women. It's not about none of that. What it's about is the way the state played women against their men, offered symbolic class advancement to separate the families, to break up that family unit that was the basis of the civil rights movement, right? That was the basis of it. Once that family unit was broken up, hell, we got the lowest marriage rates out of any group. In the early 1970s, we had the highest. So within a generation, our marriage rates died. And that was principally because, again, when it came to family courts, when it came to no-fault divorce, that became something that structurally benefited women. They got child custody, they got child support, they got alimony. Men didn't get any of that. And for Black men, we were lucky to be employed, especially by the time the 1970s ended. All our jobs in factories went overseas. So we were chronically unemployed. Then all of a sudden you had these drugs pumped into the community. You done already gone to a school that doesn't mean anything. So your opportunities for being able to provide for your family are diminished. You start selling these drugs, and within a matter of 5 years, you're lucky if you're not in jail. How many of those brothers that we knew in the 80s that were 70s and 80s that were trying to sell drugs either ended up in prison or died, right? That was the exchange. Black men had prison, and the drug war initiated mainly against Black men. So we get back to Breonna Taylor, even though they came to the wrong house, they were looking for drug dealers, but they were looking for Black male drug dealers because it's still ongoing. The drug war initiated against Black men in the 70s. Nixon approved, right? President Nixon approved drug war. So that attack on Black men, and yet the advancement of women is what separated the family. So I don't talk about the gender war because I'm mad at some woman that broke my heart or because I want to get back at women and I hate them. Fuck all of that. I'm talking about the way the state has played one gender against another and offered structural benefits if you participate in that. And after 3 to 5 generations, depending on what scale you want to use, what that's done to individual Black men and women in terms of how they see each other and what roles they play in each other's lives has dramatically changed the dynamic. So now, as a Black male, if you want to get married, you can meet the sweetest woman in the world. But you have to actually wonder what she can do to you legally simply because she has that access. You have to now take into account, this may destroy my life for the next 18 years. If you have a child, or, she may get half your stuff, whatever it is. And it's something that we generally can't handle because we don't even have any inheritance to begin with. We don't have wealth. So now, so this just the way this is set up structurally, what can happen to Black men is so devastating. And it doesn't matter if you believe in this gender war. It doesn't matter what your thoughts are about Black men or Black women. It doesn't matter how much you love her. I've been married. I know what can happen after a decade. Y'all become two distinctly different people. And you actually, every person I've seen get divorced, they couldn't imagine from the day they got married where they ended up by the time they were in divorce court. They could not imagine. And they did not imagine that they had this woman who now had the state and the courts in her back pocket, what she could do simply because she was angry, right? But again, it's not the women that I'm talking about necessarily, and it's not even her anger. It's simply that the state is at her disposal to our detriment. That's the dynamic I'm pulling out and trying to focus on. It's really not just about the women. It's about what the women have access to and what that's done to us since the 1960s.
Let me tell you something here, Doc. Man, you spitting so much hot fire right now. I mean, like if you ain't making the Cash App, man, hit right now, boy, you ain't gonna never do it because this dude is giving y'all straight game right now.
Support the channel, man. Support Green Gorilla, man. We need this.
But let me just say this. You are exactly right on this, I think. And not only do I think you're right on this, so it's not about the individual performances and behavior and the moral turpitude of Black women. It's about a system, a structure that's set in place that allows or enables women to utilize bureaucracies, laws, policies that men don't have access to.
Yes, absolutely. Look, we often talk about Black women's behavior. And I'm not saying there's no place for it. I'm saying that we got to talk about this structural shit first, because this is the linchpin. If you didn't have that structural stuff in place, her behavior would be almost irrelevant because she could act however she want to act, but she couldn't call the police and say you threatened to kill her or threatened to rape her and have you locked up because that structural benefit wouldn't be in place for her over you. She couldn't divorce you, arbitrarily for no reason and take half your stuff. She couldn't, those things couldn't happen. She couldn't put your name on a birth certificate and you now have to go to court and hope that even though you're not the biological father, you can get removed from the birth certificate and not have to pay child support for a child that isn't yours. She couldn't do those things without all of those structural benefits. Then you got a one-on-one conversation you can have with Black women, which changes the dynamic. But so the structural stuff has to be dealt with first. But the reason I still say, her behavior is important. It's just not the most important thing, but it is important. But before we get to her behavior, let's understand something. Her behavior has been conditioned over generations by having this access that Black men don't. So from her to her mother to her grandmother, if we go back to the 1960s, we're seeing Black women that had this new access and began to develop new outlooks, new worldviews about themselves, about their men. The whole "I don't need a man" dynamic became popular. But why did it become popular? Because she had jobs that she didn't have before. So the generation before the 1980s, you were, I mean, Black women in the 50s and 60s were domestics. You know what I'm saying? They were taking care of white families. They were cleaning floors. Once they got access to, these kinds of jobs that white women traditionally had, it began to change the dynamic. And again, when our jobs went overseas, we lost employment. So the whole idea of "I don't need a man" came out of a very particular set of structural practices that gave her consistent employment. She wasn't paid as much as white women, but she still was employed more often than not. And that's still the case. She was. So now we're at a point where she's more apt to have a stable home environment. She might even own a home, right? Whereas men, you know how hard it is for Black men to buy a damn home. Look, I moved to Fresno with a doctorate, right? I have moved to Fresno, and while here, I've moved once. This is like my 12th year in Fresno. Do you know every time I've moved, and when I first moved here, I've applied to no less than 50 different places to find a place to live. No less than 50. With a doctorate in hand and a job offer in hand. I didn't move to Fresno and look for a job. I had a job before I moved here. So I'm guaranteed by Fresno State, I got the offer letter with my annual pay in it.
Right.
I applied to over 50 different places. The only thing that changed the dynamic for me is when I walked in with my wife and my baby son. Then they began to see me a little differently. And that was how I was able to get into the first place. The second place, my wife had passed away. And I applied to over 60 different places and been turned down 59 times. The only reason I was able to move into this very house, because I lived 2 doors over prior to this. I moved into this house because the guy who owned it was a white man who worked at UPS. So I'm a tenured professor at a university living 2 doors over. He's a white man that works at UPS. He let me move into this house. And you know what his rationale was? Well, in the 5 years that we've lived here, we never spoke. We never spoke. He looked at, he said, "Well, I guess I could rent to you. I've never seen the cops show up at your door." So so he let me rent it out, and I eventually bought it from him. But my point is, if that's happening to brothers with doctorates and guaranteed jobs, what's happening to everyday brothers?
Right.
Whereas most women I meet have a consistent job and have their own apartment or their own home. That's a seriously different experience between Black men and women, and in terms of how we navigate the world. Those kinds of practices are what generate the behavioral shifts, the behavioral differences in Black women over the last 3 to 5 generations. It's an entitlement that has come about from access. So now we're at a period that we haven't seen in over 50 years. And that's a period of conservative, like Trump,
right,
who's withdrawing a lot of these social benefits while we are in the midst of a pandemic, right? While we were in the midst of a second collapse, right? Because we still haven't recovered from 2007. The Black community is the only community that hasn't recovered from the last recession. And we're going into a new one. We're going into an economic collapse to the degree where, 1 out of 2 of us have already lost our jobs since February.
Right.
Half of Black Americans have lost its employment since February. And before that, Black men in 30 major cities were 40 to 50% unemployed as it is.
Right.
We're moving into a whole new period, and we're going to have to redefine what it means to be men, women, what it means to be Black, what it means to be family. All of these things are going to require redefinition as long as the benefits that women have come to enjoy and rely on are no longer. But now we're looking at actually standing on the same ground.
But you know what? Here's the funny thing about all of this to me.
Mm-hmm.
So on the one hand, you have these traditional values about how women are supposed to be treated on the one hand, and what men are supposed to do for, and how they're supposed to do right by a woman.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, you have new infrastructures set up in place that is advantaging them in ways that are not in ways that aren't advantaging black men.
Mm-hmm.
And so black men have basically thrown their hands up in the air, and for the most part, they've just given up with dealing with women in general. And I mean, that's why you see Save Yourself, Black Man. That's why you see big child men going their own way. It has reached a fever pitch of frustration where black men, particularly, because let's face it, shit rolls downhill. So every policy that advantages women is going to have a double or triple, even quadruple impact, adversely on black men, if there is such an adverse, impact or a disparate impact at all. It's going to hammer us. It's going to irritate the white guys who already have it all. The guys that you mentioned earlier, the real patriarchs who have real institutional power, who have metrics that can be demonstrated. You actually are a patriarch. It's going to irritate them, and they're going to be disgruntled about it. It's hitting us like Thor's hammer. It's slapping us in the face like Milnor. That's just a reality. But another funny thing is, so there's some women who unwittingly are able to partake in these advantages. However, I think some women understand full well what is occurring, and they want to maintain those advantages because it gives those in their demographic a leg up. Now, what I want to do right now, and I don't want to hold you too long, man. I love this conversation, though. I can talk about this kind of shit until my bones wither away, until the conditions change.
Right.
But I want to hone in for a quick second and talk about, because the destabilization of black families and the traditional roles that men and women had, and the kind of unity that existed between them, as developing a united front against racial oppression and domination, that seems to have disappeared. And now that it has disappeared, that unity, there are some people who want to keep us separated by means of gender politics. Let me go to Black Lives Matter's website and talk about what they perceive as the norm in the future for male and female relations amongst black folks, and just basically men and women in general. So this is what they say. I don't know if you can see this. Can you not see it?
Not yet.
Okay, so let me share the screen. Let me share this. I'm getting a little better at it. I'm able to truncate the time. Do you see this?
Right, I can see it.
See it? So let me plus it up. I don't know if that makes it larger.
Yeah, it did. Shout out to BGS in the chat.
Shout out to BGS. Okay, so this is what they say. We intentionally build and nurture a beloved community that is bonding together through a beautiful struggle that is restorative, not depleting. We are unapologetically black in our positioning and affirming that Black Lives Matter. We need not qualify our position. To love and desire freedom and justice for ourselves is a prerequisite for wanting the same for others. We see ourselves as part of the global black family, and we are aware of the different ways we are impacted or privileged as black people who exist in different parts of the world. So basically, it's a global movement. Not only is it a local United States ADOS movement, they're stretching their tentacles out to the globe, okay? We are guided by the fact that all Black lives matter, regardless of actual or perceived sexual identity, gender expression, economic status, ability, disability, religious beliefs or disbeliefs, immigration status, or location. We make space for transgender brothers and sisters to participate and lead. We are self-reflexive and do the work required to dismantle cisgender privilege and uplift Black trans folk, especially Black trans women who continue to be disproportionately impacted by trans antagonistic violence. We build a space that affirms Black women and is free from sexism, misogyny, and environments in which men are centered. We practice empathy. We engage comrades with the intent to learn about and connect with their context. We make our spaces family friendly and enable parents to fully participate with their children. We dismantle the patriarchal practice that requires mothers to work double shifts so they can mother in private, even as they participate in public justice work. We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents, and children are comfortable. We foster a queer affirming network. When we gather, we do so with the intention of freeing ourselves from the tight grip of heteronormative thinking, or rather the belief that all in the world are heterosexual unless he or she disclose otherwise. So, I mean,
can I ask you a question?
Go ahead.
What did any of that you read have to do with Michael Brown?
Not a goddamn thing. What does it have to do with George Floyd?
Exactly.
What does it have to do with Ahmaud Arbery?
Right. And you don't have to say that LGBT issues have no merit. Nobody has to say that, but that's not the discussion. And that's the problem. This is why I had Nyota Uhura on my show yesterday, and I've had her on it before, because she's one of the few people who was in Ferguson, right? Like Darren Seals, who can talk about this bait and switch of, because I said this to her last night. I said, very few of us were prepared for a seemingly Black organization led by relatively young Black women. Nobody was prepared to have to defend ourselves from that kind of an organization. All we heard on the outside of it was we went from hands up, don't shoot to Black Lives Matter. Hell, most of us thought it was just a change in the chant, so we were like, all right, the chant sounds good. It's actually some brilliant marketing for the organization because most of us didn't know it was a damn organization. But again, and I said this last night too, we didn't think we'd have to read the fine print on a Black organization. You know what I'm saying? So what you're doing is reading the fine print, and the fine print doesn't have anything to do with the major issues that they're gravitate to take over. So Michael Brown, it starts with Trayvon, from Michael Brown all the way up to George Floyd, and there have been a number of deaths since Floyd that have really not just really been pulled out yet. But Black Lives Matter has garnered that attention, and yet none of what they're talking about as their primary mission has anything to do with this. Anything to do with the deaths that they're talking about. Next, this is the problem.
Right. Yeah, we just want to bring awareness to the public. And look, I echo what you have said, Dr. Johnson. I think that trans issues have merit on their own accord. I think LGBTQ issues for people in the Black community have merit on their own accord. But I have a problem with decentering Black men related to a phenomenon that you're gaining attention from, and then marginalizing the very men and accusing them of marginalizing you.
Exactly.
While we are hemorrhaging, while we are in triage.
Yes, sir.
Coming in with a sneezing.
Yes, sir.
To be seen by the doctor right now.
Yes, sir.
A gaping bullet wound in my head, or I have someone's knee on my neck. So I really don't know what to say, man. I mean, at some point, we're going to have to force our way into conversation, because sometimes people will not listen to you unless you demand to be heard.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and look, I have been quiet. Like, for some reason, black men, I'm not gonna lie to you, man. Black men have a reservation about them and a kind of deference that we extend towards black women.
Well, I mean, let's think about that, and that's an interesting point, and it's easy to answer. And most of us have had this experience, right? Most of us, about nearly 80%, raised by single mothers in our community, right? From K through 12, the majority of your week that you spend in school, I think it's over 90% of the teachers across race are women, maybe 95. So from mothers at home to women in the classroom, the majority of boys, black boys in particular, have been socialized to adapt, to respond to female authority. Our very well-being depends on her as children, as babies, you know what I mean? For our own sustenance, we primarily see one figure. So it doesn't surprise me that we overwhelmingly respond to female authority because we've been socialized to. But I wanted to shout out, your boy in the chat, For Life, One Deep One, who made an interesting statement about how nothing we read from Black Lives Matter website had anything to do with black men, because it's larger than just the black men killed. It's the very concept of family with black men removed. The only acceptable black males are either children or gay. Those are the only acceptable biological males in their idea, their formulation of the black family. So we are excluded. Well, I should say the only other acceptable black males are dead. So children, gay, or dead. That's it. That's the only way black males even register in terms of Black Lives Matter, right? Well, between that idea and our socialized response to black female authority, you can see how the elimination and silencing of black men can take place with our complicity, with our help, right? We participate in the silencing of black men. I posted, and this is something I want you to visit, brother, when you get a chance, when we're done with the show, Gigi. I want you to go to this post. I made a post on my Facebook page, and I showed a number of images of white women at protest movements holding up signs that really sexually objectify black men. But then I added some posts from black women who were doing the same thing, talking about stop killing them, our black men. We need their sperm. That's the only reason you don't want us dead, because you need our sperm. I put up a couple of them. Another one was black women saying black men are trash. I've seen these posts that are talking about you niggas can't die fast enough, and they're coming from black women, right? So I put a number of those posts up, and I basically made the argument that it's not the Karens and the Beckys. They're not the only ones that got to learn how to see black male humanity. Many of our sisters have been conditioned to see us as nothing more than objects as well. And I had black women and men coming in there trying to tell me that, I'm making this up. I'm just arguing with women because I hate women. But particularly from the men, you're seeing a conditioned response to protect women, black women, from just being critiqued, from just even the question being raised as to whether or not they see us as human beings or whether or not they engage in sexual objectification. Now, you and I both know academically, how many conferences have you seen on sexual objectification of women? How many books, how many articles, how many classes have focused on the sexual objectification of women?
I've seen quite a few.
Quite a few, right? Yeah. How many have you seen on black men?
Man, dude, you can't even say nothing, man.
You can't say nothing. So when I raise the question in a post, not a book, not an academic article, not a conference, not a class, when I put it in a post, you had black men that had to immediately come to stamp out the idea that black women warrant even the slightest degree of critique.
Right.
And then tell me that, and this is what one brother said in there, he said, well, black women objectify black men and black men objectify black women. So why do we have to talk about it at all if both groups are doing it?
Right.
And I just spent, look, man, I spent from 1992 to 2008 in grad school. I ain't seen one conference, article, panel, book, or spent one. I didn't even have one lesson in any class I took that talked about black male sexual objectification. Not one.
Right.
And you're going to tell me we should shut up and be silent because both men and women do it to each other. Okay.
You know what? This is what they call, in the discipline of which I hold a degree, PhD, it's called epistemic injustice.
Mm-hmm.
In particular, is epistemic marginalization.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing that feminists accuse white men of doing when white men refuse to acknowledge that there's some sort of pathology being displayed towards them.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically saying, I could know, but I don't want to know because I don't want to hear it.
And I don't have to.
And I don't have to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
The language and the nomenclature is already there to explain the phenomena that Black men are experiencing. Yes. It's already there.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the problem. And I said this, I think when and I encourage my listeners right now to understand. And look, before I even go in there, I want to thank BGS. He put something on the offering plate. I appreciate it, my brother. I got it. You know what I'm saying? CJ, I got it. Muriel, it did work. I see it. Jalen Roddy, word up. Appreciate the donation. Thank you all. But everything that they have been doing and accusing other people of, they're doing themselves, but they make themselves the universal subject of oppression.
Yes.
And that's a dangerous way to think about the world, or to be orientated towards the world. Because what it does is it excuses your poor behavior towards other people.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And not only that, if you really want to use philosophical terms, just to be honest about this, I think what's being displayed by Black women at the current moment, and I'm not saying that Black men don't do this either in the terms of their advancement or advancing of knowledge about oppression. But right now we are engaged in a Nietzschean slave morality contest. What that means is everyone is vying to be the most oppressed group. Everyone is trying to shame and guilt others for not being in power. And that's a dangerous game to play, because what it does is it takes agency away from ourselves in order to bring about or to produce change. I'm just tired of it. It becomes exhaustive, especially when, as you mentioned before, it's all about money and high profile.
Sure.
And this is why, these kind of topics are important for Black men to hear and to listen to, precisely because it's consciousness raising. But not only that, I want to alert my viewers to the fact that, so when Brother Johnson talked about how Black women and women in general, we can talk about across the board how they've been enfranchised while other groups of men have not. I wrote or did a video called "Where the Checks Went." You need to check that out. It's short and it's kind of silly, but it's emblematic. And also I did a video on Black men not needing permission to speak.
Yeah. Because
we feel like sometimes if we don't admit to the fact that we might harbor so-called sexist attitudes, or if you even look after yourself or your needs or your interests first, you're often perceived as somebody who's taking something away from somebody less fortunate than yourself. You better wake up and smell the coffee. I think SBM knows it. I think MGTOW brothers know it. They know it. I think Ivy Moore knows it. But this kind of information has to filter up into these educated Negroes, man. Here you have a case in which the knowledge really is at the level of the working class Black men, because they're most heavily impacted by it.
Definitely. But
it's going to come from the grassroots. It ain't going to come from up top. They're trying to serve their positions.
Right.
It's going to come from the blue collar brothers and the brothers who are intelligent, who are entrepreneurial, who really can see what's going on for what it is, straight up, no chaser, unfiltered. And that's why I really love this community, right? Because they keep it real, as opposed to basking in this, this veneer of justice.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So,
but I will say this. I will say this about SYSBM, IBMOR, especially in regard to like traveling abroad or looking for different for women who've been socialized differently in regard to masculinity. A lot of that is predicated on having the opportunity to do it or the means to do it, right? This is something that Robert Staples even talked about in 1977. He was talking about how black men with means don't they make the choice to deal with more effeminate women who ascribe to femininity, not necessarily feminism, right? A lot of that had to do with access. So here's what I'm saying. It's interesting to me that you have something like SYSBM, where black males are saying, I am going to look for women who've been acculturated to deal with men differently, right? I'm going to go to other countries. I'm going to go to other communities. I'm going to look wherever I find it. The interesting thing to me is there are brothers that I've met over the last 30 years who never came up with a hashtag or a term or you know what I mean, or a title, but they started doing that. And the funniest part, man, is some of the hardest black nationalist cats, Pan-Africanists that I've ever met got wives and girlfriends from all over the world. And you're like, that's interesting. You know what I mean? So they were employing this kind of idea of SYSBM in 20, 30 years ago, because a lot, some of them had employment and income that allowed them to travel like that. But they were doing it because the conditions produced the need. You know what I mean? When you have a woman that has been socialized by her mother and her grandmother to fundamentally believe that you are a lesser being than her. Right. Nobody wants to talk about that. It's not just, she's cussing you out in public. It's not just that she's disrespectful to you. It's that she fundamentally believes that you are a lesser being. When you have the means to travel and to engage people who don't see you along those grounds, it's going to happen. But I will credit that, especially in the manosphere, I credit brothers for actually creating the term and making it a point of discussion, because the brothers that I remember growing up who had the means to do it, they did it and they didn't tell anybody anything. Look, man, after my wife passed, this is 2009, right? So I'm single for the first time since the late 1990s. And I'm looking at all my brothers. I looked at 30 black men that I'd gone to college with at some point, 30 of them. Do you know one of them was with a white woman? Two of them were with African-American women. I think it was another two of them just went monk mode, what we call monk mode now. They just stopped dealing with women at all. All the rest of them found women of color from other countries. They never had a hashtag. They never had a term. I never heard them openly discuss that as a thing to do. I just looked at them and I actually had to write them down. And I said, we're talking about, I think it was like 25 or so brothers all found women of color from other countries. And I started to informally interview them like, yo, man, why is this like, how did this happen? How come you never told me about this? Like, I met your wife, but you never explained it. And brothers had the same answer. They were just like, well, that's just how it worked out. All of them, I should add, not one of them dated less than 50 black women before they made that decision. So what does that mean? What are we saying? It's not about black women being, a naturally problematic creature. It's about the way she's been socialized in the last 3 to 5 generations. And what that produced is a culture that does not appreciate masculinity and regards black men as lesser beings. So black men who are able to look elsewhere will do so, whether it's the Latinas in your city or whether it's the women from other countries in their countries. You know what I mean? The men who will have those opportunities will begin to entertain them, because the only other option is to either go monk or in many instances be treated like you don't matter as a being. And that's unacceptable.
Right. Yeah, man, we got a lot of issues. Like, what I don't want to do is hold you forever, my brother. And I really, really appreciate you blessing me with your appearance on my show this fine Friday, because you could have been anywhere in the world.
Man, please. I'm glad to be here, brother. And I love what you're doing with your channel, man. I've been sharing your videos with people. I appreciate you. I know you ain't about to stop, so I'm glad. And I can't wait to see what the next one is going to be on.
Hey, man, for sure, man. I appreciate you. To all the listeners out there, I would like for you to share what you normally share at the closing of your own broadcast, man. You know,
you want me to? You want me to
yeah, man, we got to wrap this up with the.
Oh man, you caught me off guard. Hold on.
Yeah, I mean, if you have to dig for it, and
No, that's it. I got it. I got. Hold on. That's the wrong one. But it's here. Give me 1 second. I'll pull it up for you. Because I definitely want to support the brothers. But I didn't. I wasn't expecting that.
I mean, but in essence, what it means is, at the end of the day, only extend your time, your resources, and your love and your efforts towards people who are able and willing to reciprocate that same kind of effort, energy, love, and resources to yourself.
Absolutely.
You're not a sperm donor. You're not a workhorse. You're not a replaceable stepdad. You're not a bodyguard by default. Mm-hmm. You're a person with innate dignity and value, just like any other human being walking this planet. Observe yourself as such and take time out to look after your own interests sometimes. That is valid. Mm-hmm. So having said that, I don't want to put you on the spot any further, man. Thank you again for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for the blessings that I've been bestowed with this beautiful Friday afternoon. I want you all to have a good day. Be at peace and onward and upward.
All right. Peace.
Peace.